I'd like to coach you give great answers to Microsoft's top 7 interview questions. The first question is, tell me about yourself. This is the most commonly asked question in interviews with any high-performing companies. And here I have a little anecdote. A few years ago, I coached a Microsoft TPM for their job interview with another company. And when I asked them, tell me about yourself, basically what they did was they took their CV and they started reading their bullet points, the main bullet points in that CV, for 3 or 4 minutes straight. Needless to say, this wasn't the most impressive tell me about yourself I've heard over the years. So basically, if you go into job interviews, try to stay away from reading bullet points or reading your CV also when introducing yourself, but throughout your job interviews. Now, what's a better way to introduce yourself in job interviews? If you're a junior level role or a mid-level role, a simple format is the PEN format, which I've heard from Richard Blazevich. It's a 10-year-old format, by the way, which basically stands for passion, experience, and next. Right? You would introduce a little bit of passion, your passion for the role, then talk a little bit about your experience, and then about your intentions moving forward. The intentions moving forward are important because it's a forward-looking statement that will bring in a little bit more positivity in your answer. Right? Now, what happens if you're a mid-level or senior level, director level roles? There's a better format for this, and basically it starts with, again, introducing yourself in 1 or 2 sentences, right? Then talking about your expertise, your highlights in your career, 2 to 4 bullet points you would want to develop on the key highlights in your career, because it's assumed that you have a ton of experience that you would like to communicate and you would like them to remember about you. You would also use a little bit of metrics here and there, so they sound a little bit more compelling to your interviewer, and then you would end up with your unique value proposition. What will happen if they hire? What's in for them from your performance, right? So this would be the guiding principles of giving a great introductory statement in a job interview. And by the way, the second most commonly asked interview in job interviews with Microsoft is why Microsoft, or your motivation for the role. And here what I would suggest is you prepare the why Microsoft with your tell me about yourself. Because what I found over the years, if you prepare them together, you will win a little bit of time from interview prep. These go very well hand in hand, right? The second question I'd like to talk about here would be, tell me about the time when you influenced cross-functionally. So cross-functional collaboration is a key behavior, a key topic in many of Microsoft's interviews. Probably the most representative roles would be PM types of roles, where cross-functional collaboration would be something critically important, right? Furthermore, for a PM, cross-functional collaboration, cross-functional influence would mostly come when you have to convince, you sell a new product or program feature to some other stakeholders. So this is the types of examples that have a trend to have the best possible outcomes. I would highly encourage you to use the STAR format to present the situation and task, then the action, and then the result, because structuring your answer would ensure a bit more clarity. And clarity is something that Microsoft takes seriously while screening candidates. It used to be in their guiding principles or in their core values a few years ago. So cross-functional collaboration basically means when you convince someone that had a different subject matter expertise than yours about something, that you had an interest over, right? For PMs, it could be that you convinced another stakeholder of a new product launch, or you convinced them of a new launch date, or you convinced them that the new feature was critically important, or you convinced them that, hey, you know what, you had to do a reprioritization of some elements of a plan you're working on, and these sort of things. Cross-functional collaboration entails not only interpersonal skills, you have to communicate with the other side to regain their trust, but also to present them with some information, some data that would convince them that, hey, this is the best course of action, right? So data plus communication skills is the best way to influence and ultimately gain the other side's trust cross-functionally. So this would be some elements that would help you to give great answers to these types of questions. Question number 3, tell me about a complex decision in an ambiguous context, right? So how do you handle ambiguous situations? And this question might take some of you by surprise, especially if you are hearing it for the first time. But the key to understand here is that any complex decision-making process for most roles would entail using data. So you could simplify this interview question to something along the lines, tell me about a time when you use data in a decision-making process. And when you put it this way, then you would automatically have to come up with an example of when data made a difference in an outcome, right? So, for example, let's say you're an economist and you're presented with a business problem that, hey, you know what, we're having trouble hiring workers for the construction industry. You as an economist, you would go to research the data that historically highlighted how hiring works in your geographical area. Then you would find some patterns in that data which you would want to analyze, right? And you would find some trends that are predictive of how hiring of construction workers works in different, in different market segments, in different periods of the year, cyclicalities. Is that what you're looking for? So once you got your hypothesis using the data, you got some conclusions of, some predictive elements in your hypothesis, then you will trend towards, giving the data-driven decision-making process that business stakeholder must follow to do their hiring of construction workers. In the example I give, this is an example from my interview training program. But long story short, dealing with ambiguity means data-driven decision-making. That's the most elegant way I found to answer these questions. Question number 4, tell me about a challenging delivery or a challenging project or program or solution. All right, so apparently a seemingly standard interview question, a challenging delivery. But what I can tell you, in interviews with high-performing companies, one of the key elements any interviewer will be interested in is on your ability to deliver. Your ability to deliver on your role is something critically important and something that goes way beyond the cultural fit, the culture interview or the leadership interviews and this sort of stuff. And to this specific question of a challenging delivery, you'll be surprised how many candidates shoot themselves in the foot by presenting a story of a time when they struggled to deliver and ultimately failed to deliver successfully. Or it was a so-so delivery. It was a low-quality type of delivery. Maybe you had a major bug or a major quality defect that you patched and then it worked, but not really. But in the end, the customer was somewhat happy and we moved on. Like, I can certainly understand, business outcomes are never perfect. But when you sell yourself on your ability to deliver, it's critically important that you sell yourself on your successes. You must sell this project as success stories. And this is why preparing for a job interview with Microsoft, I would highly encourage you that you prepare success stories around when you delivered under challenging situations. Delivery means different things to different roles. A salesperson, will deliver on their sales targets when compared, to a developer who would deliver on some deadlines. But your ability to deliver will get tested, and it's quite a good idea that you prepare on this topic as well. Question number 5, tell me about a conflict with a colleague. Okay, so conflict resolution. Conflict resolution is a standard interview question for over 10 years in job interviews with Microsoft and many other high-performing companies. And basically, the type of answers you'd want to avoid here, I'm a non-conflictual person. I didn't have any major conflicts throughout my career. This would automatically signal the interviewer that you've never been part of a high-performing company before, right? If you're a fresher, you might get away with it, but still it's a poor answer. But I've heard this answer from PMs with 20 years of experience on the job. So this is the type of answer you'd want to stay away from. Now, what's the better way to answer conflict resolution? Well, think of a time when you had a friction with someone else on the team, with a manager, with another colleague. Think about how you resolved that friction. It must be a success story, by the way. Usually you'd resolve this by using data and communication, right? So, for example, if your manager wasn't happy with a feature, you would come up with some data presenting, hey, that's the absolute best way to deliver on that feature, which you would present to them in a goal to re-earn their trust. Okay, and this is how you would go around conflict resolution questions. Also, must highlight that people who have not been working in face-to-face environments, people who've been working remotely, would have a tendency to struggle more to answer these types of questions. So you must pay particular attention to these sort of things, and I would not encourage you to make things up, right? Question number 6, tell me about the time when you failed. Okay, so if you've done a little bit of research, this has become a pretty well-known interview question. It used to get people by surprise, but I feel like it's more common these days that candidates prepare this in advance. So briefly, why would someone ask you about a failure in a job interview? Because they want to see how you grew from that experience. Are you someone who's able to learn from your shortcomings, right? When presenting a failure stories, you would want to focus on your learnings for up to 50% of your answer. I like to coach people, say that, hey, the situation, task, and action would be the first half when you present the failure, and then the results would be the learnings, which would be the other 50% of your interview answer, because it's critically important that you sell yourself and you as a lifelong learner from your shortcomings. Now, of course, you shouldn't shoot yourself in the foot talking about a major mistake you did 3 months ago that took out your job, right? You shouldn't talk about shortcomings that you're having a hard time getting over with. Usually shortcomings that are still fresh, had a major conflict with the manager that still haunts you. There's not to your advantage in this job interviews. Try to talk about something that sells you, puts you in a good spot, good light, even though it's a negatively framed interview question. And question number 7 is sometimes customers make unreasonable requests. Tell me about the time when you had to push back or say no to a customer request. How did it turn out? Okay, so chances are, if you're applying for a role with Microsoft, you will have customers. You will be working with customers. And I'm not only speaking about sales roles, but it could be a variety of roles that are working with customers. It could be external customers, ideally, but also internal customers, also stakeholders or cross-functional collaborations. But dealing with unreasonable customers or stakeholders is something that you must prepare for during these job interviews. I once had a candidate, again, working for Microsoft, whom I role-played this precise interview question. And what they did was to present me a time when they had a client whom they had to sell Azure services, but the client wanted to cut corners on security. So they didn't want to buy the security stuff. They only needed the actual product. And the sales guy pushed back against this. Hey, you know what? This is not the right thing to do. I don't believe that will be to your advantage. They pushed back. They had some back and forth with the customer. They explained, they educated the customer on what's the absolute best approach to go. They maybe offered a little bit discount, so the customer, so it would seem a little bit more straightforward for the customer to handle that solution. And they kept not only they won that company, but they won that customer, but they kept that customer for over 5 years, right? So this is sometimes in these job interviews, you would want to show a little bit of backbone. Hey, you know what? The customer, yes, it's hugely important. Everything starts from the customer. You must show customer obsession, but within the norms of reality, of realistic goals in your jobs. Right, so I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.